The products we all buy were almost 7% more expensive in March this year compared with March of last year. You take food and gasoline out of the picture and it's closer to 5% more.
Bob, either way, inflation is hitting all of us hard. Going in depth tonight, Fox 13 News anchor Max Roth takes a look at why inflation is so high more than 2 years now into the pandemic.
While an economy is incredibly complex, the reasons behind inflation are pretty simple. Supply and demand disrupted by big events. We'll start with supply. Supply chains specifically, which, like other chains, are only as strong as their weakest link. This is Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly line for the Model T in the Ford Highland Park plant. In 1910, all of its parts came from Ford's factory at the Ford River Rouge plant. Essentially, the supply chain went from one neighborhood in Detroit to another, about 10 miles. Today, Ford gets parts from over 1,400 suppliers, and they each get parts from their own supply chains. Countless innovations make it possible, but they rely on a stable economy. Glenn Schmidt chairs the Department of Operations and Information Systems at the David Eccles School of Business. He says one of the simplest and most transformative changes is the standardized shipping container.
If you think back decades ago, the components would have to be loaded on a truck, get it to the port, unloaded, reloaded on the ship, shipped over to the U.S., unloaded, reloaded on a truck, shipped to the manufacturer. Now, the shipping containers completely revolutionized that. You just load it once and you're done.
The containers allow quick, easy shipping when the system functions. When COVID hit, the containers piled up at ports and aboard ships. Suppliers at every level halted production.
We've had, occasional disruptions like an earthquake in Japan or a fire here or there at different facilities, but we've never had a real global disruption like the pandemic has created in the last several years.
And products less complex than a car are impacted as much or more. Think about what the cost of a gallon of gas does to the cost of doing business. Would you believe for the whole year of 2020, the average price of gas was $2.24 a gallon? In April, it was $4.37. It's easy to understand what that would do for transporting food. A simple gallon of milk that cost $3.32 on average in April 2020 was $4.01 in April 2022. A pound of bacon, $5.58 in 2020, $7.42 this year. A pound of coffee, $4.43 in 2020, $5.53 this year. Relatively simple products sourced from near and far, but the small producers feel the biggest bite of large disruptions.
We call this the bullwhip effect. It's like you swing a bullwhip and there's a relatively small movement at your wrist, but at the end of the bullwhip, it's a huge swing.
And as the large-scale disruption of COVID wanes, others are here to varying degrees. Mark Nold focuses on worker issues as chief economist for the Utah Department of Workforce Services.
The volume of labor in this country is actually shrinking.
He was already watching the gradual disruption of baby boomers leaving the workforce. The disruption is not gradual anymore.
So there is a mass amount of, I would call it COVID-induced retirements that have occurred. Might not have happened at that same pace had COVID not happened.
And those retirees still spend money. They need mechanics, restaurant servers, lawyers. They need eggs, household supplies, and gas, you name it. They still create demand, but they're not part of the labor supply.
And so you have the same amount of commerce being asked in the country from less workers.
Nold outlines 3 potential fixes for a labor shortage: allowing more immigration, outsourcing jobs overseas, and using artificial intelligence and automation. But even then, the trends may require new ways of thinking.
What's so interesting is we're talking about a capitalistic economy and allowing it to shrink. That seems anathema to capitalism.
Utah is unique in that we still have a high birth rate, and that helps, but we're also still a part of the larger economy. Now, another factor both economists mentioned was the infusion of money from the federal government during the pandemic, keeping consumer demand high while supply still suffered. In studio, Max Roth, Fox 13 News, Utah.